Welcome to Rome. This is The Bittersweet Life with Katy Sewell and Tiffany Parks. Hello, this is The Bittersweet Life. I'm Katy Sewell.
I'm Tiffany Parks.
Tiffany in Rome, Katy in Seattle. And today, we're going to be tackling a question from Ireland. We're all over the world today. So I'm going to read you an email. Tiffany, a lot of these questions are for you. I think I can sort of weigh in on it a little bit, of course. But I'm going to read this email and then we'll see where we go from here. I have edited this a bit for clarity, and I did let her know that I was going to cut it down a little bit. So just so you know, this is not all of the information, but you know, what I thought we needed for the discussion. All right. This is from Aisling in Ireland. She writes, I stumbled upon your podcast when I had a sudden urge to motivate myself to plan my move to Italy in April. I have dreamt of living there ever since I was a teenager. Here is my background in a nutshell. I closed my holistic therapy business due to an array of unfortunate events during the first year of the pandemic. It was upsetting at the time, but I quickly realized it was pushing me in another direction. And I have fully accepted and trust in the new direction of my life. I am drawn to moving to Italy, a dream I thought was buried so deep. But I am not a planner. But I am excited by the idea of starting from the ground up and building a life for myself in Italy. Of course, I would love to find it easy to get a place to live. So I was listening to episode 55, titled Zones, and Tiffany mentioned stumbling upon a young boy with a yoga mat under his arm. It sounds just like how I might find a job, being honest. And I smiled because it's nice to know that I'm not the only one. So quick aside for those of you who have not listened all the way back to episode 55, which you should, by the way, why not? Tiffany was telling a story about how she ends up with one of her first jobs when she gets to Rome, where she just happens to see someone walking by with a yoga mat under their arm, and she follows that person and asks.
Because I was a trained yoga teacher. I'm still a trained yoga teacher. I don't do it as a job, but, you know.
Yeah, so you follow him. Was it a him? I can't remember if
it was a guy. Yeah, it was a college guy.
And you follow him to where he's going and then talk to the people who own the place, right?
Exactly.
And did get employed. Is that right?
I did. Not very gainfully, but technically
Yeah.
I was employed.
Yeah, how much were you employed? Like once a week?
I think I had at first it was 2 and then I had 4 classes a week.
But not enough to live on, you would say.
Oh God, no. Not nearly enough to live on, especially because it wasn't paid very well.
Yeah, I mean, since Aisling is asking about this and thinks that this might be how she gets a job, how much were you being paid, would you guess, to do those 4 sessions back in the day?
I cannot remember, but it depended on how many people showed up for class. So basically he gave me a percentage of whatever he earned from the classes, and he paid me once a month. And I remember him like going through the cash, you know, and just handing me a wad of cash. And for a month, 4 lessons a week for a month, I don't think it was ever more than 250 euros maybe.
Wow.
You know, something like that.
Yeah.
It was pocket change. It was pocket change, basically.
Yeah. Eating money. All right. So she goes on. I am not in the corporate world. Being a holistic therapist, I do mind and body healing treatments, such as energy healing, reflexology, crystal healing, and a little massage. The question I have is, what do you do about the language, Tiffany? Could you speak basic Italian in order to teach yoga at that time? I don't have any language, and I'm just doing a little of the basics now through an app. I'm wondering how challenging it will be to get my first job. She goes on and kind of goes in a different direction. Let's pause for a second. What do you think of that sort of initial question? What do you do about the language, Tiffany?
Well, you have to learn it. Sorry. You have to learn it, not just because it'll be 100,000 times easier to get a job, but because if you're going to live in a country, you need to be able to speak the language if you want to have any kind of an authentic experience living there. So I would say an app is not going to cut it. If you're not moving right away, and I'm not saying you can't move without speaking the language in advance, but you have to learn it eventually. So if you're not going yet, if you have some time, you might as well get started, enroll in a real class, ideally an actual class that you go to, not just an online class. I would highly recommend that. And you might get a ton of ideas just being in class with other people and talking about Italian all the time. And the teacher might have some ideas for you. And, you put out feelers that way. So I would say take a class, get in a real class and be serious about it. And secondly, you can get a job without speaking the language. It's not impossible, but that I just don't use that as an excuse not to learn, I guess is what I want to qualify that with. There is a pub in Rome, and I'm not saying that you should get a job in a pub because clearly you have other qualifications, but just to put it out there, there is a pub in Rome that I go to with my husband every so often. It's an Irish pub, actually. And a lot of the young people who work there, and they kind of change quite often, but a lot of times they don't speak Italian. Like a lot of times we walk in and I'm just so used to speaking Italian to wait staff because I'm in Italy that I'll start speaking Italian to them and they'll kind of not be 100% sure what I'm saying. Like you can tell that like maybe they can understand water and they can understand napkin and a few basic words, but they can't sit and have a conversation in Italian. And so I'm like, oh, right. Of course you're Irish or you're American or you're English. And so I speak to them in English.
Mm-hmm.
So there are jobs that you can get in which English is not required. I had to teach yoga in Italian though. And I got really annoyed when later on he hired another teacher who did her classes in English. And I just was kind of like, why didn't I get this option? Maybe if I had maybe if I didn't speak English, maybe if I hadn't spoken Italian, he would have said, okay, sure, you can teach in English. But I just assumed that would not be a possibility. And so I got myself a yoga book and I already knew how to teach yoga. Okay. I had studied it. I had taken a very intensive course. I had been teaching for a number of years. So I was qualified to teach yoga, but I didn't know how to say, I didn't know what to say. And I'm not talking about the names of the positions that are maybe in Sanskrit. You don't need to necessarily translate them, but like, how do you say specific things about your body? Like, how do you describe, the things that a yoga teacher says, like feel your foot, like rooting down into the ground, elongate your muscles, whatever. And so I got myself a yoga book so I could sort of understand how in Italian yoga was described, if that makes sense. So I did my homework. I worked really hard to create a quality yoga class in Italian. I wouldn't say I was fluent when I moved here, but I was very proficient. I was not a beginner. I didn't just speak the basics. I had a very good vocabulary and I was confident enough to have conversations in Italian.
Well, so she says earlier in this letter that she's hoping to go in April. She's got a little bit of time, but we're here at the end of February, so she's kind of got a month, but you think that she could go without knowing as long as she enrolls in a class when she gets there?
I mean, yes, it's not illegal to move to a country without being able to speak the language, but yeah. English is a language that a lot of people speak. So I would assume that she's going to be okay. She'll be able to, get by at the supermarket. I mean, you got by for a year with very little Italian, Katie.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people, I think, move to Italy and they think, oh, I'll just pick it up. And eventually you will just pick it up, but it can take years. I have friends who didn't have any Italian when they moved and they didn't take a class and it took them years to learn the language. And I feel like you miss out on a lot of life. You miss out on a lot of connections that you could have, work opportunities, obviously, and just in understanding the culture and being a part of the place you are. So if you don't speak any Italian beyond the basics when you go, just be serious about taking a class and don't just think, okay, I'll pick it up, I'll get an Italian boyfriend. And that does work, by the way, but it only works if you guys speak Italian. a lot of Italian men do speak English. And so if you end up dating a guy who speaks English, he'll be so excited to be able to practice his English that your Italian won't improve.
I'm sure I've told you before, but one of my good friends in college was a man named Enrique who was a study abroad student from Spain. And he used to come over to my house after we had a class together our final year in school. And so he would come over to my house after that class and we would watch a Spanish soap opera every afternoon together. And, I had studied Spanish in high school, but I hadn't studied it since then. So it's been like a good 4 years, maybe more. I was kind of testing that theory. Like, if we just watch this every day, I'm gonna pick it up. Don't even tell me. I'm gonna pick it up. I'm gonna figure it out. And he would just, I mean, we watched this for weeks, like weeks and weeks and weeks. And every now and then we'd be watching and he'd turn to me and he'd say, all right, what do you think just happened in that scene? And I'd say, oh, well, she said such and such a thing and this happened and this happened. And he would just start laughing and say, nope. And I'd say, well, am I close? And he's like, not really.
So no subtitles.
I mean, yeah, so I think it is hard. There is that felt like if I just always have the Spanish language television on in the background, I'm going to pick up something. And it's not necessarily true.
No, not necessarily.
Now, if I had had him like saying in English while they were talking, who knows? I don't know. So she goes on a little bit. A lot of her concerns really revolve around language, but I'm going to read a little more. She says, I want to check out places like Siena before I settle on a place to live. But I know that the bigger cities are probably better for networking and making friends. I'm just personally drawn to quieter places. Should I go to the smaller towns later when I have more Italian? What do you think of that question? This desire to want to live in a small town, but thinking like as a brand new arriver, it might not be best to be there.
Well, I mean, I think this could go either way because definitely you're not going to have a big expat community in a small town, but maybe for your language learning, that's actually a positive because it will force you to have more interactions with native Italians, and that will force you to have to improve your language. So it depends on the kind of person you are. Are you the kind of person who likes to dive into the deep end? Or do you like to walk in slowly and dip your toes in first? I'm kind of the same way. I love the idea of the small town. I've never lived in a small town though, so I don't know if I would actually like it. But it'll definitely be harder to find jobs, just full stop. Whether you speak fluent Italian or not, it's harder to find a job in a small town. And I think it's harder to make friends in a small town. In a small town, you've got a lot of people who grow up in that town who've never left. And Italians famously make friends, in their youth, and they keep those friends their whole lives, especially if they don't move out of their town. And so you've got people who have these extremely solidified friend groups, and they're not really looking for any more friends. Whereas if you go to a big city, you've got people who maybe have moved there from a different part of the country and they don't have a lot of friends yet. And so they're open to making friends. And then of course you've got expats who are obviously much easier to make friends with because they're in the same boat. You'll find it much easier to find work in the big city. But here's the thing. This thought came into my mind when she talked about the kind of work that she does. There are so many opportunities now that simply did not exist when I moved to Italy because of the internet. And even more than the advent of the internet, I almost think the post-COVID world has also made this even more so, even doubly true, is that you can kind of launch an online business and have clients around the world. I mean, I don't know her specific type of body work. Like, I don't know, do you need to actually be physically with the person, have your hands on them, or is it more of a life coaching, like a talking situation? I don't know. But I do know at least one, I think she's American, who lives I follow her on Instagram. I don't know her personally, but we've had communication online. She quit her job, had some big corporate job that she didn't really like very much. She also taught yoga, and I think she had some other qualifications in that vein. And she moved not to Rome. She moved to a small town in southern Italy, in Puglia. Now, I don't know her personally, so I don't want to say something that's not true. She may also have a physical yoga studio that she teaches out of. I do not know. But I know that she has online clients that she teaches through Zoom. And she coaches, it's kind of a life coaching, meditation, yoga all together. And she lives and thrives off of that, from what I can see. That's something that I could never have done in 2004 when I got off the plane here.
Yeah.
Didn't even have a reliable internet connection. There was no way that that was happening. But nowadays, I just think be creative, look for alternatives to just, working for somebody else in their yoga studio. It might not be that easy to find that kind of work. It might be the kind of thing where you do that to supplement your income and you have to have another job.
Well, she does say, I am open to working pretty much anywhere, from coffee shops to wellness retreat centers. My aim is to cover costs and get by and enjoy my experience for the first year, settle in a bit, get better at the language. She says, I haven't been to Italy for about 8 years now, but I used to visit frequently, and I've always noticed that they don't speak very much English. It always comes back to that, how much do I actually need to know the language? I would also love to know any tips you have on where I should try for work, even farms where I might live and work for my keep so that I could be able to start working right away. So, I mean, that's sort of the end of her questions, and you sort of addressed that a little bit. Like maybe you lay some groundwork for some things that you can be doing right away, but not perhaps in Italy itself proper.
You mean online?
Yeah. While you try to find
Yeah.
something.
I mean, if I would say, yeah, I always say this to anybody who wants to move abroad. I'm like, if you have a way to work remotely, grab that, do that. Even if that's not what you want to do forever, if you have something marketable that you can either be working for someone else or freelancing, do that, set that up so you have at least something coming in. Because I think people, particularly people coming from the States, but I would assume also coming from other parts of Western Europe, I think they overestimate how much jobs are going to pay. I think the typical, like you think of a sort of basic, just out of college job, or even while you're in college job, like working in a coffee shop or waiting tables, something like that. You think, okay, well, it's not, I'm not going to make a fortune doing that, but it's a living wage. In Italy, 9 times out of 10, if you're in a big city, it's actually not a living wage and you can't live on it. And they just assume, well, young people are living with their parents, so they don't need that much money. And so they pay you something that you could never pay rent with ever. Yeah. It's not as easy as like, okay, I get a job at Starbucks. I can live on that. I'm not going to get rich on it, but I can live on it. You might not be able to live on a coffee shop job in Italy.
Well, and I mean,
so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing about Italy and why we've done episodes about the best places and the worst places to move if you're looking to move away from your country. And Italy often doesn't make the top 10 list, even though it's a desirable location for a lot of people because of the art and the architecture and the weather and the food and all the things that we love about Italy. But it hardly ever makes the list because the salaries are so low compared to other places in the world. If you're going to move there and you're going to work there, you might just have to accept the fact that you're not going to make as much money as you might if you were to move to a different country, say.
Yes. Yes. And I think specifically the wages are not comparable to the cost of living. So you've got some places in the world where the wages are low, but the cost of living is also very low.
Right.
In Italy, the cost of living is not as high as it is in many major US cities, but it is still high for the level of the average salary.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in Rome, or at least from my experience there, when I lived there for a year and was not hardly making any money, living on a very thin stipend. Once you pay for the internet and the lights and the rent is pretty high. Like it was, that was our biggest expense by far. The grocery store food is actually kind of reasonable, I would say, but yeah, it's a thin margin if you are not making that much.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, there are certain things that are expensive in Italy, and there are certain things that are cheap. Things that are expensive are gas, electricity, not just gas as far as gas in your car, but the gas heating in your house, the gas that you need in your house, also electricity and rent, obviously. Those things are very high. But eating out costs less, and grocery stores generally cost less, and service things cost less because people are paid less. It makes sense, right? So like if you go to
Right.
get your legs waxed, for example, it'll cost a lot less than it would cost in the States.
Right. But one of the things I love about, and we should talk about it sometime maybe, is one of the things I love about Italy and many places in Europe for that matter that we do not have in the United States is that whatever the price it says it is in the grocery store or at the restaurant, that is actually the price that it is. Whereas here, the tax is not included, the hidden fees are not included. And so you'll think, oh, it's only, I'm going to eat this pasta for $9. No, you're not. You're going to eat that pasta for like 12 something, you know? And that is one of the things that drives me the most crazy after spending some time living in Europe and coming back and living in the States is why do we not just round it in? You can still tax it, but just tell me how much it's going to cost instead of hiding it from me.
I know. I hate that. Claudio, and I'm sure many Europeans, when he's in the States, he's just like, he has to constantly remind himself that when he sees something, he's got to add like, I don't know, like 15, 20%, depending on if it's a restaurant or clothing or whatever. And that is one thing that's great about Italy. However, the sales tax way, way higher in Italy. It's 22%. Sales tax in Italy. So you think you're getting a good deal, but actually you're not. You're kind of getting screwed.
But it feels like a good deal because they say, 22 euros up front. And you're like, okay, I know what I'm in for. I know what I'm in for. Whereas here, they not only do that, but, they try to trick you. They'll say, it's $5.99. So you're like, oh, it's only $5. No, it's not. It's $6. And then it's actually $9. Or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So do you have any other things that you think Aisling needs to know, or anybody else who's considering this needs to know before she gets on that plane in one short month from now and moves to Italy?
I guess I would just say, she says she's not a planner. And you always say, Tiffany went to Italy without a plan and she made it happen. And that's kind of true. But I did do a ton of research. And it wasn't as easy back then to research stuff. There weren't all these forums. There was no Facebook. It was just not as easy to get information. And there was, no way to contact other people who were out there doing it. You just had to like dive into the unknown. So I would say okay, your personality, you don't like to plan, but you might need to plan a little bit.
So if she had to look into, say, 3 things before she left, planning wise, maybe
I would
3 is
say,
too many. We could also do 1.
Well, let's do 3.
Okay.
She's European, right? She's Irish.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say look into your health coverage in Italy. Like, is it, can you transfer it? Like, I don't know how it works between European countries, but that was something I thought about. I did not have that opportunity. So I bought myself insurance to last at least a certain period of time, just in case something happened. So consider that. I do kind of think it's kind of useless to try to look for an apartment when you're not there, but you might want to set something up that's short term, just so that you don't have to stay in a hotel or something that's going to be really expensive.
Yes. And I will add to that, just from my experience, is that we set up a short-term thing thinking that it was a friend of a friend or something. And she had a spot that we stayed in and we thought we'd be there for a week, maybe. We'd get to searching for an apartment immediately and we'd find something in a week or 2 maximum. Mm-hmm. And we ended up taking a month at least, if not longer, to get into a place. And so when you think about that, if we had been in a hotel, that would have crushed us financially. So real reason to set something up if you can.
Yeah. If you can find a place, it better, even if you can find the place that you're going to be, at least a 3-month rental. If it looks like it's something that you could live with, better to set it up. It was not a possibility when I went, but things are easier now. I would say those 2 things more than anything. And then the language, like study, just do it. It's hard, but it's also exciting and fun. So just work on the language because it'll make things so much easier.
And do it in a class, you're saying. Don't try to do it with books or online.
Books by yourself? Can you learn a language from a book? I don't know.
I have a book on my shelf right now. Where is it? Hang on, I'll show you. Here you go. I put this, it's an aspirational book on my shelf. It says 30 Days to Great Italian.
I don't believe that you can learn a language from a book. Not unless you have a very strong foundation and you're just trying to improve your grammar. Like get much more specific grammar, but I really don't. I think you'd have to be some kind of a genius to be able to learn a language without a class. So yeah, it has to be a real class. It could be online, but a real, like a human teacher who's listening to you and asking you questions, answering, giving you feedback, not just like a recording of somebody off in space.
Man, it would be really funny. I wish you and I could figure out a way to like actually try this book and like give it to somebody and have them, and you can judge their Italian 30 days later. It's a big commitment, but
yeah,
it'd be a really interesting experiment to see.
Look, I tried to learn Spanish from a book, and I had a Puerto Rican boyfriend at the time, and I still didn't learn Spanish.
So there you go. All right. Well, thank you so much for that email and those questions. And thanks for finding the show. When you meet other expats on this big adventure, please pass on the word about this show to them. And that goes for the rest of you too, not just expats. Just tell all your friends about this podcast. Whenever you're asked, what's your favorite podcast? I hope that we spring to mind.
Even if you're not asked, don't keep us a secret.
Yeah, just start writing it on people's hands. Need something to listen to. Yeah. Yeah, and thank you so much for this. If you have a question or an idea for a topic that you'd like to hear, you can always send us an email, bittersweetlifepodcast@gmail.com. If you can't remember that, just visit our website, thebittersweetlife.net, and there's a contact us link right there. And and we'll leave it there. And until next time, this is The Bittersweet Life. I'm Katy Sewell.
I'm Tiffany Parks.
Join us again. Bye. If you love the show, take a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We love to read while you listen, and your rating might help someone else discover the show. Take just a couple of minutes to let the world know what you think of this show. It means the world to us. Thanks.